How's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I join you on the eve of what should be a very interesting next few days of some good old Call of Duty roster mania. I record this video currently on August 21st, the technical last day of the Vanguard season, with tomorrow being the very first official day of the Modern Warfare 2 season. Now, the reason why these dates are so important, the reason why I'm getting very excited right now, as you can tell, is that tomorrow not only is it the first day of the MW2 season, but that means that is also the first day in which teams can sign free agents. That has been what has sparked all of this drama. All of this roster mania madness has been all in preparation for this first day. And I'm personally wanting to go out there and bet that I think we will have something official happen tomorrow. How big could it be? How small would it be? I have no idea, but I think we will see something go down tomorrow on that first official day of MW2. And on the eve of this day, we have already got some reports coming out talking about some rumored teams, and this one would be one of the more interesting when we talk about the CDL landscape. Now, this article comes in from Breaking Point's own good old Crone, aka Intel Call of Duty, and the title of this article reads, "Sources: Minnesota ROKKR pursuing Afro and Cammy to play alongside of Attach." Now, if you go on to read the rest of this article, which I highly suggest that you do, I'll have the link down in the description to this one, you would see that, that kind of goes into depth talking about how these players could be joining alongside of this roster, give some great history, some perspective on how these players could come together. And then toward the bottom of it, it also does discuss that Bance maybe could be the fourth option to this team. That one does sound a little bit more fuzzy, nothing 100%, but he is somebody that could be linked as the fourth man to this supposed Minnesota roster. Be aware of the language, like I said, because there's a lot of ifs, there's a lot of maybes, possiblies involved in this one, and it also says that Minnesota are pursuing Afro and Cammy. It doesn't mean that, hey, tomorrow Minnesota ROKKR are going to announce this team. It just sounds like Minnesota is working hard to try and get all three of these players, and more specifically, whoever Attach wants, which I feel like, before we talk about this lineup on paper, I feel like this is most likely what we talked about that Minnesota would do. Their first step, obviously, was to wipe the whole board and really just try and get Attach back, because I think when it comes down to his ability as a player, what he provides has really been showcased so far throughout this offseason. There were a lot of people talking about, before we saw Optic Texas and obviously Atlanta Faze start to get involved in some at least in some supposed free agents, that he was the guy. He was the first guy to look out for, and in my eyes, without question, Attach could sit comfortably, or at least fit a lot of these interesting roster puzzles very well. And so Minnesota, to me, is trying to get Attach back, and they're basically saying, who do you want? And it sounds like maybe a few of those players are Afro and Cammy, and maybe even Bance added on to the list. And one of the first things that sticks out to me for this Minnesota team is that you do have two players who, at least from the last season, run that flex role. So between Attach and Cammy, you will have to figure out how exactly that does go down. To me, it sounds like maybe Attach would be the main AR in that situation. It very well could be Cammy as well. But obviously, I like the combination of those few players being together. I also really like the addition of Afro. There were a lot of teams who I really thought were going to sleep on Afro. I thought he was just going to be a quick addition, maybe made to Toronto, and that was really going to be the tail end of it. Like he just transfers from the London franchise over to another franchise that loves to have their European players, and that was really going to be the end of it. I think he holds top 5 player in the game type of potential. And another thing that I do like about Minnesota is one of the supposed SMGs that could be joining alongside of him, which is Bance. Not only would it be a great little reunion for Toronto to have Cammy and Bance back on the same team as well, but it also would be great to have what I believe would be the future of this lineup, and somebody like Afro be based with one of the best in-game leader type of players, one of the best strategy minds of the game, somebody who is unbelievably unselfish. That to me would probably be the best player that you could possibly put alongside somebody like Afro if you really want to see him develop the right way. And while there is a lot to like about this, Minnesota team, there are a few things that I'm not the biggest fan of, and we'll kind of go player by player. But the one thing that does strike me, without question, is that, okay, great list of players. When you think about a team, can this roster work? Like, you can't just throw 4 Slayers at a team and just be like, okay, yeah, they'll figure it out. It doesn't work that way. when it comes down to Minnesota, I can absolutely see these three, if not these four players on paper together as a lineup moving into MW2. There's no doubt about that. But more specifically, player by player, I think Afro has amazing upside. As I said, I think he is a player that has some of the most upside in the league, all-star level. When we talk about, you know, his ability, the biggest problem for him this past season was a lot of consistency issues. That was really the story of the Ravens, was that, hey, they looked great online. They had that stint where Gizmo wasn't in the team and Afro was really looked upon to be the player. He would step up, but when it came down to LAN, we really didn't see that. Gizmo would take a hit, Afro would take a huge hit as well. Those two guys were not the same when you took them from the online environment to the LAN environment. And it's not to say that jitters were the primary cause of problems, but there was something that was going on in the gameplay, whether Afro or not, that was an issue. And so I think, again, if you are Minnesota, you want to try to solve that problem, and Bance would be the guy to help try and figure those things out. Somebody in Cammy who did have a slow last season. To me, this roster really comes down to Cammy. If this full four-man lineup comes to a commitment, if you will, the biggest piece that I look out for, which could take this team from, you know, a middle of the pack type of roster to contending for titles possibly, would be Cammy's performance. Are we going to see Cold War Cammy, or are we going to see more of a Vanguard type of style to his level of play? And there are a lot of organizations, a lot of franchise, Optic Texas has sounded like, who were somebody who really were committing possibly to somebody like Cammy. They see that upside. They see the ability in his gameplay. So I think if you are Minnesota, I guess whenever you see other franchises who are willing to make the same investment as you into a player that could have some question marks on them, it makes you feel better about your decision. It makes you know that you're not just the only person who thinks that this could be something that happens with this guy next year. And again, for somebody who was called multiple times throughout this past season to be dropped, the fact that Optic Texas was looking at somebody like him to fill the role of Dashy and or Illy is incredibly important. So if you're Minnesota, you get him. I think that is a more than worthy investment to try and make. But again, a lot is going to be on the Cammy. And then for Attach, no doubt about it, right? One of the best free agents available. The only problem with Attach, I think, could be the fact that he's stepping into his first full season as an AR, right? He was great last season with Minnesota, but he's going to have to be Mr. Reliable again. He's going to have to be just as good, if not even better than he was last year. There were some critiques about, you know, maybe his KDs were a little bit higher than they should have been. You know, the team wasn't seeing success. It was kind of a Celium effect at times, where he was putting up great numbers, but the team was still losing. They're going to have to translate that, and then all those kills, I guess you could say, that those slang numbers are going to have to translate into W's. So again, not something that you're necessarily terrified about, but it's just something that you are aware of as a Minnesota franchise. And then finally, the most questionable piece of these four players is going to be Bance, just based off the article. I think he's a great piece. I do. I think if he were to come alongside of this roster, does it technically from a slang standpoint put more pressure on all three other guys? Yes, it does. But if you're already investing in Afro, Cammy, and Attach to be great, putting Bance alongside of them isn't something that's bad. It just puts it in bold. But I really like the idea of, from a strategic standpoint, this team just gets that much better now having himself and Cammy coming from that Toronto system, one of the best strategic teams that we've seen, at least in my eyes, in Call of Duty history, without a doubt, so far in the CDL. So to have two out of those four players, somebody who I think was probably involved in that strategy the most, and somebody like Bance, to have that mixed in with chemistry, mixed in with what I feel like will be a great person to have alongside of Afro. Again, a lot to like when it comes down to this ROKKR team, even though they still do have a lot of question marks. So the next thing that I want to do is actually take you to a roster builder. So I forget exactly how I was able to find this. I don't know if it was like through Twitter, if, again, my apologies, but what I will do is I'll just link this down in the description so you guys can do this yourself. You know, there's like a lot of these when it comes down to like the NBA and the NFL. You can kind of see what this roster is going to look like. This is fun to do. It's cool to look at the statistics and see if this team were to form in Vanguard, how some of the KDs would mix. And let's really see, right? Let's go and put these players on paper and see how they would mix. So we've got Afro, we've got Attach, we've got Bance, and we've got Cammy. Thankfully, we don't have to go very far. But this is awesome, though. You can like look through all players that were in this past season, see how they mix alongside of each other. But if this were to be Minnesota moving into next season, you can see how the stats look, right? The overall KD ratio would be a 1.01. You get the hardpoint KDs, the S&D is a little bit lower. The control looks best out of all of them. You can see some stuff that's more in depth, right? You can see hardpoint kills per 10 minutes. You can see time per 10 minutes. You can see first bloods. You can see control kills per 10 minutes. A lot of really good information to kind of let you know what we saw out of these 4 players last year, and obviously the averages of all those things mixed in together. Now, the one thing that I will somewhat disagree with when it comes down to this roster builder, and it's nothing that like it's not doing properly, it's just the expectation of what I think that this team will be in MW2. Now, that's saying that with also out having even seen the game, knowing how it plays, whatever. But I do think that this S&D KD is going to go up majorly. I think Attach obviously had a 1.08. You see Afro 1.04. I think these KDs rise, especially this one from Cammy. He was one of the best S&D players in Cold War last year. I think his level of play, especially now with these 3, will be that much more influential. I think if you are this Minnesota team, you're looking at Cammy in a lot of different ways. I think it'll either be this KD at the bare minimum, if not in the 1.1, 1.2, maybe at tops type of range. Like I said, I think this is just going to be, you know, a great looking S&D team moving into next year if they were able to form, not just because you have these 2 guys, but Attach, known as an excellent S&D player. We saw Afro having some amazing moments in that game mode as well throughout the year. So I think you have 4 players who all have a great understanding of S&D. There's no doubt that the comms, the chemistry is going to be there with this roster as well. And then on top of it, as I said, I think you have one guy who can absolutely turn his level of gameplay up in this game mode. But if Cammy can be a little bit better, maybe if you see a little bit of a less productive Attach, Cammy could step up in there. I think that this KD could rise for somebody like Afro, again, dependent on the game. Cammy, as I said, is the guy to have the spotlight on moving into next year, no matter what franchise he's going to be a part of, no matter what team he's going to be a part of. On this Minnesota team specifically, though, he is the guy that can make this team a great roster or could keep them more in the middle of the pack. Alrighty, so the next thing that I want to do, and as I said coming into this video, this to me is just as important, just as interesting to discuss as the actual roster is, which is the impact that this team could have on the rest of the CDL. So let's go ahead and input these players. So let's say that we do have this team of Afro, Vance, let's just say that Cammy's the flex and Attach is the main AR. Obviously, that doesn't really matter right now. So let's go ahead and take these players off of the free agent list. So we've got Attach out of the way. We've got Vance out of the way. Where's Cammy at? Do we pass Cammy already? Let's see. Cammy, there he is. Cammy's gone. So now that we have the official free agents off of the table, let's talk about how this affects every other roster outside of Minnesota. Because, and we'll talk more specifically about Cammy and Attach, right? These were the 2 players outside of Illy and Dashy at a certain time. And now with Arstees maybe on the table, it sounds like he's going to be a restricted free agent. They go down a little bit, but they are without a doubt, no question, some of the most valuable free agents on the table of any franchise. So I'm sure if you are a Boston Breach, we already heard that they were interested in somebody like Cammy. Attach played the same role last year. I'm sure they were interested in Attach. Florida, who has an open slate, I'm sure would love to have both of these players. LAG, I kept talking about it. You know, Attach would make perfect sense on this team, or at least some form of whatever the Gorillas are going to look like next year. Same thing for Cammy. Maybe even the London Royal Ravens could have been interested in bringing Cammy in as the flex to this roster. When we talk about New York, I mean, like we said, if we have Hydra on this team, it makes the natural sense to have either Cammy or Attach either as both of your ARs, as one of your flexes. And then we talked about the main ARs a ton. And then also if they are to have Skies in this team, it makes it that much easier. Maybe Skies switches into the main AR, and now you've got a star-studded lineup of either Cammy and Attach rounding out this team. But like I said, that's not going to happen. Las Vegas Legion, don't know if they were ever in the running. Now, there's one team that I left out, and the reason for that is because I feel like this franchise could be hit by this roster more than anybody else, and that is the Atlanta Faze. There is no question about it. If Arstees is going to be a restricted free agent, if he is not going to be on Atlanta last year, even if now they want him back and Arstees, his mindset is like, no guys, you wanted me out, I'm gone, it hits Atlanta Faze in a very, very difficult spot because Cammy and Attach looked like the best options that you could have had, and now it puts Atlanta in a very big predicament if this roster forms, because what do we do now? Like, do we try to bring Arstees back? Like I said, is he even interested in rejoining this team after knowing that he was the first one on the chopping block? So if you are Atlanta Faze, I feel like one of the options that you could try and make happen would be simply, who does Arstees replace? So for example, if Arstees ends up going to the Seattle Surge, which I feel like would be his best destination, do you then grab Accuracy and put him as the fourth? Is that really who you want? I don't think that it would be. So that's something that I don't know 100% if that would work. Maybe an option, and to me, what could be a front runner if this is a type of move that you'd want, would be maybe you send him to Toronto Ultra, and then you'd get somebody like Insight as the natural fourth. And again, if this is a Cold War lineup, this would look great, but is this really who you want? That could be what Atlanta Faze has to deal with, is maybe we send him to Seattle, maybe we send him to Toronto. So that to me would be the first option. The second option would be try to grab an SMG. And like I said, if we were to like look at the SMGs, for example, I mean, you've got some solid names, but it's just not something that I would attach to the Atlanta Faze, no pun intended. Like maybe Awakening could be the player. Maybe you try to really fight for somebody like Hydra. You may have to really pad the pocketbook, for example, but that could be a move that you have to make, because technically he is an unrestricted free agent right now. Maybe that's what Atlanta Faze has been doing. They know that Minnesota ROKKR could be off the table, Cammy and attached. So now what we do is we end up making this move, right? We bring in Hydra. Hydra would then be the next SMG. Simp would switch to a flex, and then you bring in Salim as the main AR. A great looking roster on paper, but a very expensive one, you'd have to imagine, at that. So it's a weird move, right? If you are Atlanta Faze. And I would say the last option, which essentially kind of removes what we just talked about, which is simply fight to get Cammy or attach. To throw at those two players whatever it is that you can to make sure that you can have those guys on your team and not allow for ROKKR to attain them. Cammy would probably be the easier one to attract, given that Attach and ROKKR may already have a relationship together. Maybe they've worked out a deal, maybe not. So I think maybe Attach could come here as the flex, or maybe, like I said, you bring in Cammy, you offer him more, you really try and sell him on the Atlanta Faze dream. But like I said, those are the three options. You either get who Arstees replaces, you really try to work on an SMG, or the most obvious would simply be make sure that Cammy and Attach do not get to the ROKKR together. Now, it doesn't just affect Atlanta Faze. Obviously, like I said, I think it affects them more than anybody if this move were to happen, but it also really limits the New York subliners. I think in some capacity, you could say that, well, Paul could slide in here as the flex, guys to the main AR, but like we talked about for New York, I mean, Cammy would be such a great piece to go over here. Attach would be such a great flex to go over to New York, and then take a look at what that lineup looks like if you are the subliners. I mean, from top to bottom, it looks excellent, but now that's not, going to be possible if this team ends up forming. And then if you're New York, like, who do you really look out for in this flex role or main AR role? Do you give a call to somebody like Awakening? Do you bring in Paul X? Do you try to bring in somebody like Priesta, for example? So it would really limit a team like NYSL. Another roster that it would directly impact is the Toronto Ultra, because it sounds like Toronto Ultra were basically just going to have this team, right? It was going to be Scrappy as the flex coming in from Challengers. They've already replaced Cammy, so he was never going to be of interest again. You were going to get London Royal Ravens star, right? You were going to grab Afro coming into his second full season, add him onto the team, and then Toronto has Kleenex, Afro, Scrappy, and Insight, one of the more polished looking teams moving into next season. And so if you are Toronto now, let's say that Scrappy is obviously going to be here, but what do you do to get another solid SMG with Kleenex? Do you maybe give Hixie the position? He's already on the bench. He's obviously been on the Toronto NA Academy team. Maybe the other SMG in that equation would be somebody like Vikol, who's obviously, like I said, been on the Toronto NA Academy team alongside of Hixie. Another team that's also going to be impacted mightily by this move would be the London Royal Ravens, because not only are they losing Afro, but a lot of people expected this to almost not really be a trade, but be Afro goes to Toronto, and in place of him, Bance is now available. So Bance would then go to the London Royal Ravens. So if Bance is now not going to be here, if you're London, do you really try and compete for Hixie or Vikol? Maybe Toronto gets their pick of the litter. Let's say that they really want Hixie, for example. Well, maybe do you try to get Vikul now on the team, a great looking, challenger player that we've seen who has a lot of merit to him. Maybe you try to look at another challenger player like Wardy, maybe not as well known to a lot of the community, but a great challenger player in his own regard. We've seen London already make a big investment in the challenger players from Europe, so maybe they give Wardy the opportunity. So you can start to see, what the impacts this would have on the rest of the CDL if Afro, Bance, Cammy, and Attach were to come to this team. A free agent monster of a lineup when we talk about, how these players relate to different rosters. And like I said, on paper, it puts Atlanta Faze in a very, very tricky situation if Cammy and Attach are now no longer going to be an option for them. But feel free, guys, to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments on this Minnesota roster. It's a Minnesota makeover. What's going to happen with this team? What do you think this roster's potential could be? Where would you rank them if you had to in the standings next year? Would they be a top 3 team? Do you think they'd be more in the top 6? Do you even think they could be in the bottom 4? Where would you rank ROKKR? Also, what impacts do you think that this team would have on the rest of the CDL? What then happens for Atlanta Faze if Arstys is now no longer here? Cam and Attach are now no longer going to be on Atlanta Faze. Who do they grab? I would love to hear what your guys' thoughts are, obviously, down in the comments. And if you guys have made it to this point in the video, I greatly appreciate it. If you have not done so already, make sure to like this video and also to subscribe. Like I said, I think the next few days are going to be wild. Maybe this Minnesota team gets confirmed. Maybe Atlanta Faze gets confirmed tomorrow. Who exactly knows? The only thing that you have to worry about, though, is subscribing, because if you could miss out on all this stuff, and if you don't want to do that, all you got to do is press subscribe, and I'll be here with all the updates, the opinions, and the discussions that you need. But thank you guys so much for watching this video. I greatly appreciate it, and I will catch you back here on the channel very soon.